Welcome. Welcome to Auditing with Autism, where I like to discuss philosophy, music, autism, and world events. In the last couple videos, I've been talking about phenomenology, and I think I'm going to just go ahead and leave those videos be as they are, and I probably won't make another video about phenomenology here anytime soon, because what I discovered was that I actually already said the purpose, the meaning of phenomenology in those other videos. I actually already said the final word on what I wanted to say, which was basically that if we can include phenomenology as a science, where we can trust its outcomes and processes, then we will be able to potentially uh, regard subjective experience as a scientific fact. And I think that's important as more people are having more subjective experiences that have meaning of incredible importance to them. These subjective experiences are so meaningful that they can change a life. But without science behind it to prove that it's a scientific fact, it won't be regarded as a scientific fact. It doesn't change the subjective outcome or meaning to the person. But I think it would be nice to have a language structure centered around subjective experience, hence phenomenology. And so, if you haven't looked into phenomenology, I recommend checking it out. Today, I'm going to bring up some quotes from the quote book, which I love to do, and specifically regarding psychology. I've had a few conversations with some friends about psychology, and lo and behold, I suddenly saw some videos on psychology. Some of the autism content providers that I watch started making videos on psychology that I found intriguing, interesting, and fascinating, extremely helpful. And so I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring and talk a little bit about what I had learned about psychology and psychiatry. This is a bunch of quotes by a man named Daniel Siegal, who was born in the late 50s. He is the professor of psychiatry at UCLA. He graduated from Harvard, and I read a book of his that I found excellent. And so I have a few quotes from him in from that book. You know, the way I think I'd like to start talking about Spiegel's quotes here is to sort of define how the brain operates a little bit. He was very good in describing brain science in the beginning of his book, and so I thought I'd go ahead and include that before I start talking about some of his ideas and discoveries. So I'm going to start with just describing that quote. He says, "The brain has waves of electrical activity sweeping across the brain on a regular basis. 40 cycles per second, or 40 hertz pattern has been noted in the brain because active, and it becomes active from front to back." So this is something I think most of us know about. Our brain is made up of basically electrical activity. And the electrical activity that's happening in our brain has a cycle, a 40 hertz per second cycle. And that's important, especially if you're looking at a brain being in an environment where the electrical activity could be influencing the brain in a negative way. I don't want to go too deep down that, but a lot of people are concerned about, like, for example, 5G microwave frequencies and other what we might call pollution, frequency or electrical pollution that some people, some of us, are extremely sensitive to. And, it definitely could and can affect the brain. It's important to know about, anyway, that the brain has an electrical frequency of 40 hertz per second. He continues to say about the brain that value systems in the brain function by way of increasing states of arousal, unquote. Value systems in the brain. So, he's taking us right into the direct connection or experience mode of a human who is, having an experience, let's say, with the environment or with another person in the environment. And the increasing states of arousal, as he calls it, the experience of those moments are going to be the way the brain finds value. It will be making judgments on all of the experience that it has constantly and putting a value judgment on those experiences. If the brain doesn't have those experiences you know, to have, if it doesn't experience anything, then it won't be able to judge anything, and therefore it won't have any value systems. Sort of makes sense. Let's see. I'm a little bit off track. Let's go back there. Let's see. It's going to go right into traumatized parents, and he gets into some deep psychiatry, but I want to make sure I cover all of the brain here. He says that, quote, the anatomic and functional separation between the two hemispheres of the brain permits their processes to be quite independent at times, and it directly shapes the construction of subjective experience. So, I find that important because I'm a left-handed person, and I've always been sort of fascinated by the idea that the left-handed person is connected to the right side of the brain, and the right-handed person is connected to their left side of the brain, and how that might actually influence their subjective experiences as they run around in the world, creating, getting these states of arousal in the world in our experiences, and therefore how we create judgments and therefore value systems. Uh, if you're a right-handed person and you're working off of the left hemisphere of the brain, you may have a different subjective experience than a person who is left-handed and working off of the right side of the brain. I don't know this to be true, and I don't think Spiegel is saying that specifically, but it certainly makes me question about it. There's a great book that gets into discussing that called Lefties, Sinister People by Fincher. And that's a great book, especially if you're left-handed, to check out and learn a lot about what it means to be left-handed and the history, of being left-handed, and all about it. He goes deeply into it. Back to Siegal here. He says, I'm going to go right into the relationships aspect of uh, you know psychiatry is interesting because it studies the brain and how the brain and the human makes these judgments and therefore its value systems. And it also looks into how when a brain is traumatized or a person is traumatized in any way, really, how it can affect the brain, and therefore it can affect how we judge our experiences, and therefore it will affect our value systems. And so this is extremely important. It says, for example, he says, quote, non-consciously, the brain is wired, at least with regard to the fear response, to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the amygdala is excessively sensitive and fires off a danger signal, it will automatically alter the ongoing perceptions to appear to the individual as threatening. This may be the basis for phobias and other anxiety disorders. Unquote. So I found this so important to write down because of the fact that it's mentioning how the brain is being affected in that fear response. It's a hardwired response. Obviously, we need to have our fight or flight. Uh, I guess there's a third, but basically, what we know about the fight or flight response is in the moment of danger. And so, what I want to bring is a thought of what we perceive as danger. It goes right back to the value systems. If we are having an experience, an arousal experience in our environment, we're aroused by some loud noise or some smell, and then we judge that noise or smell, for example, to be dangerous, then how we will value our experience in that moment is that there's a threat. And so he's suggesting that this can be, being so hardwired, this ability to sense danger, it allows us to be maybe potentially, I'm saying, more sensitive to danger when we don't need to be. Maybe you've seen that documentary where they discovered that humans are running on, adrenaline and cortisol, these hormones that are causing us to respond to fear. But humans are doing it constantly. The documentary suggested, I forget which one, I think it was on PBS, but it suggested that most animals, they will have a moment of fear and danger and the rush of hormones of adrenaline and cortisol. And then the fear will be over and they will go back to their natural state, which doesn't have cortisol and adrenaline rushing through their blood. But humans, we tend to always be in the state of fear. It appears that we're constantly, most of us are constantly in a fight or flight mode most of our lives. And therefore, we're running on these hormones of cortisol and adrenaline, which is very dangerous to our circulatory system, for example. I mean, it can increase our pH. It cause inflammation to occur, which can lead to all sorts of coronary heart disease and arthritis and all kinds of things. So the ability to not be in that constant hardwired self-fulfilling prophecy, he says, of constantly perceiving danger in our environment, the ability to not be so fearful all the time and be more like animals in nature where we can calm ourselves down after the fear is over is the goal. I think he's clearly saying that. And maybe this is why humans have, created techniques like meditation and relaxation therapy and other things that we do to kind of try to calm ourselves down. He says here that, quote, the unresolved trauma or grief creates pain and suffering in both parents and their children, unquote. Unresolved trauma, yeah, that makes sense. He goes on to say, quote, the fact that these traumatized parents are capable of sensitive, attuned caregiving of their children, even under stress, suggests that earned status is more than just being able to talk the talk. They can also walk the walk of being emotionally connected to their own children, despite not having such experiences in their own childhoods, unquote. I love this quote because he's telling us here that, humans with our reasonable mind, our ability to have reason, we can overcome the emotions that we may be feeling from latent or past trauma. And so, a sensitive parent who is capable of thinking about their trauma and thinking about it in a reasonable way so that they're not affected by their emotional remembering of that trauma. People and parents who can do that, they're capable of being loving, caregivers and parents to their children and overcoming that, even if they haven't technically dealt with it themselves. And I think that's really important to know that, even if you are a traumatized person, you can still have successful relationships with other people by overcoming your emotional response using reason. And, it's not so easy, I suppose, but it takes work. Meditation helps, I think, but it's certainly something we can do. No matter what trauma you've gone through, potentially there's a way through that trauma using mindfulness. And that's really great if you have kids and you want the best for your kids. So I like that he said that about parents. He also says, quote, emotions represent dynamic processes created within the socially influenced value appraising processes of the brain. So you know, emotions are everything, really. As I said before, we use our five senses to perceive the world, and that will give us an emotional response. And it's really important to listen to those emotions. And I heard a great psychologist, I think her name is Sandra Paulson, and she had some great things to say about it. How when we are you know perceiving our emotions, if we're doing a good job of perceiving our emotions, that means we're doing a good job in perceiving our bodies, because our bodies are the feelers, the five senses that are perceiving the threat, the love, the smell, potentially, the environment, and that will give us an emotional response. So it's really critical to be able to feel your body and know what it means when you feel your body, so that we can then understand the emotions that it's bringing to our brain. And then, like I just said, we can use our power of reason to control those emotions. I think there are the ancient Greeks, I think it was Plato, and Socrates and Plato are usually said in the same breath. It may have been Socrates or Aristotle, possibly, who said that the brain, the metaphor he said was, the brain is like a person driving a horse carriage, kind of like those Roman chariots, where you have two horses in the front, you're standing in the chariot and you're driving it. So the two horses would represent the passions of good and bad, or basically our emotions. And reason in this metaphor would be the person driving those horses. The horses themselves are out in front experiencing, the five senses, you might say. And as those five senses are coming into the horses, they are giving us these passions, as the ancient Greeks called them, these emotions. And we can control our emotions using our reason. And and that's really important, as we try to become more actualized as adults, and try to become better people, and all that good stuff that we try to do as we grow as humans. Understanding our emotions and being able to control them so that we can use them to our benefit is definitely part of the process of being alive, in my opinion. And I think Siegel is also mentioning that. Siegel says, quote, emotional processing prepares the brain and the rest of the body for action. So that, unquote. And that goes into what I just said, basically, of being able to, understand the emotion that we have and control it using our reason. Reason is critical thinking. And so that's why I sometimes will get on my soapbox and say, everybody needs more education, so we can have better critical thinking, so that we can understand things like our emotions better. Another good quote, Siegel says, did I call him Spiegel originally? I think I did. There's no P, it's just Siegel, Daniel Siegal. Sorry about that. He says here, quote, studies of dyads with a depressed parent reveals significant effects on the emotional development of the child. The experience of expressing one's emotional state and having others perceive and respond to these signals appears to be of vital importance in the development of the brain. So this is where, you know, unquote. You may have heard about or, seen these documentaries. I remember, this is quite a while ago, so maybe you haven't seen it, but when Russia, when the USSR basically finally collapsed in the early 90s, one of its satellite countries was Romania. And filmmakers went to Romania and they saw what was going on with these. There were some, with these children that were being raised in an institution with no parent and no love. So these are children that have no other disability except for the fact that they have nobody to love them. And so what the documentary was showing us was what the effect is on a human child if they don't have that vital, as Siegel points out, that vital development of the brain, which is to have a mirrored connection with another human being, or somebody else might call it love. The experience, he says it, he calls it, quote, the experience of expressing one's emotional state and having others perceive and respond to those signals. So that's basically, you can use words to express your emotional state, or if you're a child or a young, like a baby, then you will have other ways to express that. You might use crying, or you might use your eyes and look right into the eyes of your mother, or something like that, which he mentions here. Actually, he says it's interesting that, see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. He says, quote, seeking proximity to a caregiver and attaining face-to-face communication with eye gaze is with eye gaze contact is hardwired into the brain from birth, unquote. So it seems to brain scientists that having that vital face-to-face contact or eye gaze, which occurs in infants when they are usually when they're suckling, they will look into the mother's eyes, and the mother will look at the baby, and that eye connection there is extremely important, for the development of the child's brain. And it may also, as a person with autism, I got to suggest, I find it hard to look into people's eyes when I'm talking to them. And so I have kind of always been wondering, why are people so offended that I'm not looking in their eyes, when I speak to them sometimes. So I think the answer may be that it's hardwired in us. Maybe we are noticing, or some people are noticing uh, that they're offended when I'm not looking into their eyes, because they think that I'm not trying to connect with them, and they may not even understand why they feel that way. I would suggest that maybe they feel that way because it's, like he says, it's hardwired. It's something that we do innately. We do it like out of, it's out of design. It's in our makeup to look into each other's eyes to get that feedback. And so maybe that's why people are a little bit distraught if I'm not looking directly into their eyes. But again, I mean, we can use our reasonable mind and critical thinking to look and see above that, as adults. But when we're dealing with babies and children, that eye-gaze contact is going to be one of the things that helps a brain develop. He says here that, quote, "We are unique individuals precisely because both our value systems and our interactional histories are one-of-a-kind combinations. As the intertwined nature of value systems responses and environmental encounters unfolds, each of us continually emerges and defines ourselves," unquote. That was kind of a thick sentence there, but yeah, basically, I mean, he's saying something that I think I already touched on, which is that, when we go out into the world and we have our encounters and arousals, as he calls them, we're constantly judging the experience and putting a value on it. And this will continually make us change and emerge a new person and define ourselves anew. And because of that, I find the importance of critical thinking and being clear of mind to be, utmost of importance, because in this situation, we don't want anything we don't want to be fooled by any false flags, or we want to have a clear idea of what we're experiencing so that we can, have an understanding of it and put a proper judgment and therefore a proper value on that experience. And last time I'll talk about it, but we certainly don't want to have these experiences be based on fear, as he says. It's really easy to have our experiences based on fear, as he says, because of its hard wiring in our brain. It's so hardwired into us to be fearful of almost any new experience. Again, this is why critical thinking is so important to me, because using critical thinking, we'll be able to understand more our experiences and be able to judge them better, and therefore put a proper, or at least a better qualified value on our experiences. I hate to throw in religion, ever really, because I know how it affects people sometimes. But one of my favorite quotes by one of the greatest, is it's from Jesus, and he said, it's the best quote. He said, and I have it written down here somewhere, but he said, the most important thing to him is that people make the right judgments. And making the right judgments is the virtue of prudence, my favorite virtue. If we were constantly making the right judgments, we wouldn't have unnecessary fear. We wouldn't have unnecessary judgments on our experiences. We would always have the right critical thinking, because we would always be making the right judgment. And, as I mentioned before, many videos ago, constantly making the right judgment not would be the goal, but we want to have the fun of experiencing uh, the world at large and making mistakes. Making mistakes is part of our journey here as humans. We can't imagine, I mean, I can't really imagine anybody making zero mistakes. And I don't think that's the point. If we made zero mistakes, then to use the metaphor, we would be like some spiritual angel or something. And somebody said, "Well, why are the angels jealous of humans?" Because we can make mistakes. And I had trouble figuring that out, but I think I get it. Making mistakes is fun. It can be fun, but we don't want to make we don't want to make mistakes that are too damaging to ourselves or other people. We want to have fun with our mistakes, in my opinion. Let's see, I think I've only got one more here. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate you guys watching this video. And if you like it, please hit the like button and share it too if you want. So he says here, finally, it is as though the two hemispheres of the brain act as a mirror, allowing a person to see and think about oneself through its reflection. So I sort of started off with that, and I think I'll end with that. The mirror has two hemispheres, and I talked about being left-handed and right-handed, and I don't think it's a versus. It's not left versus right. In my opinion, and what I've tried to do is use both. See, I've discovered something that I want to share with you guys. This idea, of course, I got to look now. Yeah. This idea is that if you can use both the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, that you will have a better experience in the world, a better, as he calls it, arousal of experience, a better experience to have to make a judgment on. And therefore, when we make our value systems about things because we've judged them, we will have a better judgment for our value systems. So, what do I really mean by that? Well, my personal experience is I'm a left handed guy. But what happened to me when I got older is I discovered that I'm not always left handed. Like, for example, when I play baseball, I throw with my right hand. So I'm not left handed in baseball. Turns out I'm not left handed in sports either. Like with track, I was a pole vaulter. I would do that right handed. And so this was the beginning of me understanding that I was using both sides of my brain. I would write with my left, but I would play sports with my right. Well, eventually that led me to the understanding that maybe I should try to incorporate both constantly. And so what I did was, as you can see, I play the guitar. Well, what I eventually did was I decided to I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The first thing I did was I started writing with my right hand. I wanted to switch it up. So I would start writing with my right hand instead of my left until I could do it proficiently. And then I would start playing sports with my left hand until I could throw a baseball with my left hand. And what this did was it allowed me to blend the two hemispheres, I think, in a way that allowed maybe a better electrical flow, a more consistent 40 hertz flow through my brain, I think. Well, I'm not sure if it was effective or not, but I do know this next idea was effective. When I am playing the guitar, I've been playing for, 30 years. About 10 years ago, I'm a finger picker. I don't use a pick per se. I play classical guitar, so I, would use all my fingers. And except for the pinky, nobody in guitar uses their pinky. So what I did was I buckled down, and I remember it was a whole season. One winter, I buckled down and learned how to play the guitar with my pinky, and just finger picking with my guitar with the pinky. So now I can use all five fingers on my playing hand, my picking hand, and I will never forget how that affected my brain. I was when I was learning my pinky, uh, I was also doing a lot of reading and writing. It increased my ability of comprehension in reading. It increased my ability using my pinky. It increased my ability in thought. And so this is something that I know for sure happened to me. So what I'm suggesting is that as I increased my dexterity, I increased my mental acuity. And so the mind body connection is, I think, really, really important. And as Sandra Paulson, psychologist, mentions, how important it is to really listen to your body and try to understand what that means emotionally so we can make better judgments. I think that's all I'll say about Daniel Siegal and psychiatry right now and psychology, but it was just a little thought on brain and how maybe it works and his thoughts on how the brain is working. On a personal level, I just want to say, thanks for hanging out with me and, sticking with me, all my subscribers. Thanks for taking me over the 200 mark. That really felt good. And I just want to say, I'm sorry I'm not making a lot of videos, but I've been so busy here, in my community. Basically, I've been doing a lot of stuff. We're building houses, cleaning roofs, cleaning gutters. There's so much gardening, new ditches. There's a lot of work that we're doing here, and I've been keeping really busy. And so it's been a little bit distracting from my YouTube presence, but I'm never going to give up on it. And I love you guys, and I hope you're having a great day. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.